Hello and welcome along to this edition of Viewpoint, Europe's first human rights talk show. In today's programme, Europe's women. New decade, new century, but do we have the same old problems? We cross our continent to find out. We'll hear from Sweden's new EU minister, Birgitta Ohlsson, about how she's managing a high-powered, high-profile career and the prospect of motherhood. We cross to Germany to see an award-winning social project in action, and we meet its founder, pilot, former banking analyst and businesswoman Anka Trishler. And domestic violence, it's still something that holds women back. We hear from Johanna Nellis from the Council of Europe and from Paul Wolflight, who helps men who've been violent towards women. That's all to come, but first joining us is Isabelle Stillwell, one of the most powerful women in the media in Europe. Here's her life in pictures. Isabelle Stillwell, a journalist since 1980 and mother of 3 grown-up children, lives in Portugal. She's currently editor-in-chief of one of Portugal's leading daily newspapers, presents a daily radio programme and a weekly television talk show. She's had 10 books published. That's Isabelle Stillwell, her life in pictures. She actually joined us here in the studio. Hello, Isabelle.
Hello, thank you.
Fine. So what about the attitudes that you've experienced as a professional woman over the years? Have they changed in any way?
We still have to change in Portugal, where women and men for the same job women are paid lesser than men. And I think that we still have to work through. I think men in top jobs and meetings tend sometimes to be very patronizing. Sometimes we feel, or I feel, that they don't really know how they should talk with me. They don't know if they should be nice because I'm a woman, if they should be as hard as they are with another man and negotiate on the same level, or what their attitude should be.
At this stage in your career, ageism or sexism, which is a problem, if either?
I think that media tends to go on giving this image that women have to be beautiful, young, and always well dressed. And so an older woman maybe feels menaced by the younger women. I think this happens. I think women themselves, when they choose people to work with them, have to be able to look at somebody they think might compete with them in age and so choose an older woman than a younger woman. I think that it's one of the challenges we have, not to let age, because then women will be in the work field until they're old enough and their validity has expired, and they'll be sent home or somewhere else because they're not so beautiful.
In Portugal, though, things will perhaps change, will they not? Because we all have an ageing population in Europe. Do you see women then catching up any later on in the game, as it were?
Yes, I think women will have to be more demanding on themselves, and I think that is a good thing. They'll have to learn. They can't say, "Oh no, I don't know anything about internet," or "I don't know anything about that," because that's another generation. They'll have to keep up, and that's a challenge.
Isabelle Stillwell, thank you very much for the moment. We'll come back to you. But from Portugal, we go to Scandinavia now. Birgitta Ohlsson, Sweden's EU minister, has been telling Viewpoint what makes her country easier to live in if you're a career woman.
What is so crucial in our welfare model in the Scandinavian countries is that you can combine being an active parent but also being on the labor market and doing your career. And that is because we have a well-developed child care system where the state is providing a lot of support in this area. And also in Sweden we taxate the individual, not the family. And then it's much more easy for women to go out and work. Well, I'm expecting my first child in a couple of months, and for me it's crucial that you should not have to choose between being a mother and being a minister. you must be able to be both, actually. But then you need to have a very active, supportive partner. If you're, for example, married, you need to have a strong network of friends, and you need to be supported in your society. And I think that's so crucial to have role models in these different fields. I feel ashamed that we have sex slavery in Europe in the year of 2010. I think that's horrifying, and I'm quite devastating that prostitution is so common in many European capitals, but also domestic violence. You can find domestic violence in my country, Sweden. You can find it in the southern parts of Europe, in the northern parts of Europe, in the eastern parts of Europe, and really need to work more together to combat domestic violence and prostitution and sex slavery. When it comes to gender, we have a lack of representation on the labor market supply when it comes to women, so more women need to get out and work. And Europe cannot afford to have the most well-educated housewives in the world. Women need to get out and show their competence.
So, a number of issues raised there by Birgitta Ohlsson, Sweden's EU minister. We'll be coming back to some of those points a little later. Right now, Johanna Nellis works for the Council of Europe's Gender Equality Division. Who's doing better at this in terms of countries around Europe?
Well, there are some countries that have a long history of working towards gender equality, such as the Nordic countries. So there are many of the Nordic countries that have reached the 40% threshold or are very close to doing so. There's also the Netherlands and Belgium that are very close, or in that area. And then you have other countries like Albania, Turkey, and Ukraine, where the figures are much lower.
So essentially then, governments, why have they not ended this difference? Why have they not sorted this out by now?
Well, many have tried by introducing quotas, and either by doing that through law, requiring all parties to respect these quotas, and then other governments have left it to the parties themselves, who have decided themselves to set up quotas and to respect them. But the world of politics, like any other world or area, is also governed by stereotypes, gender or preconceived ideas of gender roles, etc. So when it comes to distributing power, these gender stereotypes play a role, and it's very difficult for the government to tackle that.
Women are still having to play catch-up when it comes to equality in pay. What more can governments do or institutions do to resolve that issue? Governments
can only really continue legislating against this, providing incentives for companies to fare better and to recognize the value of greater diversity that women would ultimately bring to the working world. So it's really through that way that governments can and should proceed.
But surely in this world that we live in today, rather than just governments and institutions doing something, we should all do something, because we're now living in a world where more and more households have two people that work in them. So if you're not giving equal pay to, for example, the woman, then you're depriving a household of that income. So surely it's in everybody's best interest to do that.
Absolutely, it is. But then you would have to go much further or way back, if you like, to start when it comes to in the area of education, making sure that perceptions of gender roles and indirect discrimination is not a factor when it comes to hiring women, when it comes to negotiations around pay issues, etc. The public service or public sector, of course, is doing much better than the private sector, simply because it can be regulated by the government. But that means that in the private sector, it all comes down to attitudes, and they need to be changed, and that's a long process.
Johanna Nellis, thank you very much indeed for the moment. Now, while many women lead vastly improved lives from earlier generations, for others there's been less of a change. Their world is one of part-time work, low pay, and quite often social isolation. In this film, we take a look at an award-winning social inclusion project for immigrant women living in Wiesbaden, Germany.
I like sewing and I enjoyed sewing, so I thought maybe some other people do as well, even though it's an old-fashioned hobby. But who could actually be interested in doing it? And I thought maybe people from all different countries, because I live here in a place where it is international, but hardly do these people talk together. So get them together and work and get these different cultures working together, talk to each other, because as long as they talk to each other, they don't talk about each other. And so this is why the culture part came in, and atelier culture means cultures working together. Right in the center of Europe you find women who live in the Middle Ages, and you find women who govern a country. And it's all possible, all in between, as long as you get the chance and as long as you are willing to take the chance.
So Anke Trischler, that was you we saw in that project, in that film, in Wiesbaden. You now work as a self-employed consultant. Why are you now taking that risk?
The Atelier Culture project was a very interesting project because is still a very interesting project, now more or less really a working company. So many different countries come together and nationalities come together. So this is really a hands-on way of making people work and talk together and reduce the stereotype thinking.
Now, going back into your other careers, as it were, it was a male-dominated world. Were there any problems there?
Yes and no. Yes, in a point of view when I consider West Germany, because I've been working in East Germany, in East Berlin, and funny enough, we had a separation of 40 years in between when we had the Iron Curtain, and as I started in my managing position, the people or my colleagues from East Berlin didn't have any problems with us. They were used to have women in leading positions, while my colleagues from West Berlin, where we had a branch, considered as being sort of very scaring to them. They couldn't accept a woman in a leading position, and yeah, so I experienced both. So, but I think what they have learned is, and what they have experienced is the climate and the atmosphere at working places and working surrounding changes as soon as women come into the court or into the place, and this is what they benefited from, and this is what they expressed to me as well.
So you've said to me in the past that women are their own worst enemy. What did you mean by that? And what do you mean by that?
They are their own worst enemy because they many women seek recognition or want acknowledgement. They are not always courageous enough to step out and to show what they actually can show. And some of them are their worst enemies because they say, oh no, whatever I can perform is not enough.
So essentially women should get together in the same way that men band together in the workplace and help each other.
The human beings should help each other, nevertheless, if it's a woman or a man. I mean, they should just respect and accept each other as these people are, with all their education, with all their background, and learn from each other. This sounds very much like a fairy tale, but I think it is the only way how we can improve our life leading together.
Anke Trischler, thank you very much indeed for the moment. Now, progress in education, politics, business and the media doesn't seem to have done a lot to stop some women from living in fear of abusive men. Take a look at this.
If you think that this is an unsafe place for a woman, wait until she gets home. 1 out of 6 women in Europe suffer domestic violence, and it's time that it stopped. The Council of Europe wants you to speak out, whether you are a witness or a victim.
Now, Paul Wolflight is joining us in the studio. He's worked with men who carry out domestic violence against women in the UK. Paul, thanks for joining us, by the way. How do you go about changing men's behaviour here?
Okay, so I feel it's very important to name that this is men who are actually causing damage. There's a risk factor. So when you do this work, the first thing is it needs to be in a certain setting. So that element of responsibility is important. Caring, and this feels really fundamental. This is in an intimate relationship. Most of us are in intimate relationships at some level, we say, because we love the person. There's a kind of basic ground of care. That's clearly getting switched off. That's getting switched off with the guys. It switches on at times, but it switches off. The element is, unless you can keep that consistently, there's going to be a problem. Now, if I'm in an intimate relationship, I'm inherently going to feel emotionally vulnerable. Because anyone I care for, they're going to go one day, even if it's only because they die or I die. There's loss involved. I've got to be able to tolerate disappointment. I've got to be able to tolerate difference. If I can't tolerate that on an emotional level, I'm either going to switch off or I'm going to control the people around me, i.e. my family. So that element of accepting emotional vulnerability feels really fundamental. It's part of life. It's not a good or a bad thing, it's just inherent. The other thing that's really important in there, and this is a cultural thing, is getting clear what love actually is. We kind of mix up love and what I'd call desire, wanting and gratification. And the men definitely mix that up. They'll talk about loving their partner. And my words would be, well, I can quite imagine your partner thinks you want her. I doubt if she's got much sense that you love her. And getting the difference. Wanting is about me. And it's not that there isn't a place for that. Loving is about me and you. And actually getting that mutuality, that is the ground and needs to be the ground of any basically intimate, close relationship. So the work is essentially about what I call guiding them.
When a man recognises that he is being abusive, do they come along to you of their own volition, or how do they get to you in the first place?
Well, a mix, basically. I mean, we will get referrals, particularly from somewhere like social services, but by and large, the way we work, they've got to pick up the phone themselves, whoever's referring them. So they've got to self-refer. They'll hear about us. One of the best places is GP surgeries. I always stress that. GPs are the one place that men will go. Men generally won't go looking for help, but GPs is where they will talk about it. And we certainly get a lot of self-referrals through GPs. But what brings them to there is like something in the relationship has kind of woken them up. I'm going to lose her, or police have been involved. It's public now. Makes them think, I've got to do something about this.
Can you cure a man? Can he actually become better and non-abusive?
Okay, so good. We don't cure anybody. We're very clear with the men. This is a practice. It works when you put it into practice. It doesn't work if you don't. It's down to you. The things we're teaching you, actually, they don't end when the program ends. This is for the rest of your life. And it only works if you're actually willing to do that. Now, the reality is for the men who actually engage, it's not just their partner's lives get better, their lives get better.
So if traditional ideas about manliness are old-fashioned or even outdated, what do we replace them with in society?
The issue isn't about how should I be a man, it's actually what kind of person am I as a man? In other words, and what am I doing? Am I making the world a better place or a worse place? They're the questions men and women need to ask, not how is a man supposed to be?
I want to throw this over now to Johanna Nellis from the Council of Europe. Johanna, what improvements have been made in treating domestic violence?
Well, for a long time, domestic violence has been considered a private issue, so there was literally no help for victims, at least no help from the police, criminal justice system, etc. That has now changed by and large. It is now considered a crime in basically all Council of Europe member states. The police have started or know how to react to it, and in many member states they take it seriously, etc.
Is this something you've heard about in Portugal, particularly?
Yes, domestic violence has been an issue in Portugal. It's a public crime. It means that even if the woman doesn't complain, a neighbor can complain. And it's been dealt with, and I think that there's quite a lot of investment in solving the problem.
But it's all about giving up power, though, isn't it? It's about giving up power for men.
Men, when they're dying, don't tend to regret that they didn't earn this much money or they didn't have so many company cars. What they tend to regret is they didn't spend time with their children. They didn't actually, their relationship didn't work because they were never there. It's like, that's a power. You know, my ability to have a good relationship, my ability to be a good father, be involved and have my kids want to know me afterwards, that is power too. And I think we get too concerned with a certain type of power, which is very unbalanced, and it's not like it doesn't have its place.
And actually there is a very recent Deutsche Bank research on the change we are expecting, or we actually need to have in economy and in our politics and in society. And the result is that they consider women as being the agents of change. So the new working life will be much more ruled by women. So this is what they found out with their research. I found it quite interesting. So this, I actually might be tempted to go back into this banking industry if I hadn't had this interesting new company, Atelier Culture, where all the world is coming to my place instead of traveling around the world, which is again another discussion because I can be very responsible for the climate staying there in Wiesbaden and having the world coming to see me. Yes. There is a crisis in the banking system. And,
but would it be there if there were more women bosses in the banks?
I think no. I think there would be less of a crisis. I mean, the crisis was foreseen. It had to come. It had to come. It was absolutely overheated, and it had to come. This is actually the reason why I left the banking system a couple of years ago and decided, oh, I have to do something proper and to earn my way, an honest way, earn my money in an honest way with an honest way of work. There would have been a crisis, definitely, yes, but I think women would have been prepared to take the consequences. Now the taxpayer is taking the consequences or paying for the consequences. I think the crisis would have been less hard as it is now, because it would have been prepared, and women usually have a plan B and C and D. So they would have forecasted, what can we do instead? If this wouldn't work, what can we do then? So yes, would have been less hard.
So quotas then, would we need quotas, back to your point originally?
Well, quotas are a very good way of creating opportunities, and opportunities for women who don't usually have access to certain opportunities, although they may very well bring all the qualifications that they need. There isn't a single example that I know of where the numbers show that if you follow the natural pace of development, you achieve the results of more participation faster than when you introduce a quota. So there is no statistical evidence to prove that quotas do not work, or that relying on natural developments would serve the purpose quicker or faster. So yes, I do think that quotas are definitely a way forward.
Paul Wolflight then, wouldn't quotas actually increase the risk of resentment if you had more women in positions where there were quotas? Men would say, well, hey, look, I didn't, I worked twice as hard and I didn't get as far.
Well, I mean, the difficulty with this is the reason that you need quotas is because there's an imbalance in the first place. In other words, they didn't get there on their ability. They got there on the fact that there's a kind of prejudice towards them as opposed to women. So all quotas are doing is actually putting back a balance. And the question I would say is, well, are you going to be good enough? Because at the moment, you're not getting the benefit because you're necessarily good enough. You're getting the benefit because, well, it reminds me of how they used to do the old 11+, which no one talked about till many years afterwards. Something like, I think, 65% of the boys had to pass, and it had nothing to do with who got the highest marks. They did scrap that subsequently some years later, but, you know, it's like what we're talking about is fairness. And I think most men, quite honestly, I think we should have a little faith in their integrity and somewhere in their maturity. And I know that might seem like asking a lot, but I don't think it is. I think if it actually put out that way, I mean, having women involved, I mean, I think as someone else has said, we're losing half the resources, the human resources. And we need everybody. I'm clear we're all in this together. I'm also clear, as I'm sure everybody else is, there's going to be some very hard times ahead, not just financial crisis, but the whole ecological situation. It needs everybody being able to basically be their full potential. That is not going to happen until we've got men and women working together equally.
Isabelle Stillwell, have you seen a generational change? You've got at least one child who's married, grown up and married. They're all grown up, but one's married. Have you seen a generational change in men?
Yes, I have. I think I was talking about childcare. In my generation, only the mother would take a child to the doctor, only a mother would take a child to the first day at school, all those, and women would fight for that right also. But nowadays, I think things have completely changed a lot, and men are seen at schools, at doctors, at meetings with their children. And so I think this generation, as I said, has found it really, has done it not only because there's somebody telling them to do it, but they find it rewarding.
Feminism in the 21st century, does it have a place?
Of course it does. I would strongly say yes, because feminism has existed for many decades now, and it is still basically about achieving equality for the sexes.
Paul Wolflight, then, do you see are men capable of being feminist or feminist, or being attracted to feminism or being part of feminism?
If I'm seeing feminism as about having a basic philosophy of men and women being seen of equal value, of equal worth, and having equal opportunity, why would not a man be a feminist?
Isabelle Stillwell, then, you've lived through the high point of feminism as such. What would you say is now in store for women? What do they have to look forward to?
Society will help women and men to have whatever they want and be able to choose freely.
Anka Trishler, feminism, does it have a place in the 21st century?
Oh yes, definitely. It's all for the reasons Johanna said. It's all for the reasons Paul said and Isabelle said as well.
How do you see it working in future?
I see work in the future much more human, and this is because of a very female touch, definitely. It's no longer a question of ability, because statistics show, for example, in Germany, we have now students taking A-levels are 57% girls, and many universities have 60% women.
Paul, do you see more women in power?
I would hope so. I would hope so. Yeah, and in fact, I do think it's inevitable. It's inevitable. There is a momentum, and I can't see how that would stop, and I can't see how it would be of value to us if that would stop.
Isabelle Stillwell, then, what are your hopes and aspirations for your children's generation? Where do you see fairness and equality going for them?
I think it's time to leave the prophecies and hope that they'll surprise me. I don't know what will happen. I hope they'll be happy, as Paul was saying. They'll be able to enjoy their life instead of running and running, sometimes to achieve more and more, not being able to enjoy what they have. And so I'll be here. I'll be waiting for them to surprise me. And I think I'm quite sure they'll surprise me in a good way.
Thank you very much indeed. That's all we have time for. Join us again soon on Viewpoint. Until then, goodbye.